Welcome to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. My name's Ryan Rogers, and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Welcome to episode 48, Search, recorded here on February 22nd, 2023. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E, and you can check out his incredible new album, Charlemagne, on Spotify and Bandcamp. Today's intro is from the song Sally Ride, and our outro is Maybe Days. Alright, we have corrections today. It turns out most people fall asleep in only 7 minutes. I can fall asleep pretty quick, too, and I like that, but if you'd have asked me what the average is, no way I would guess 7 minutes. Like, if that's the average, my kids take 2 hours to go to sleep. And that means that there are people who are literally, by how averages work, asleep before they go to bed to average that out. I think that might be probably unreliable. Also, while another correction here, while I listed on my resume that I was entirely bilingual, that was a mistake and I should not have done that. And apparently, Japan has one vending machine for every 40 people, which I accused someone of being a total liar about, but I was wrong. But hey, you can buy a beer and I think cigarettes out of vending machines in Japan, and you probably don't even have to tip. So I actually can imagine that there's probably pretty big lineups at vending machines all over the place. Dinosaur News, published in iScience Volume 25 in Issue 1 in January 2022. The article, An Exquisitely Preserved In Ovo Theropod Dinosaur Embryo Sheds Light on Avian-like Pre-Hatching Postures. The article admits that fossilized dinosaur eggs are fairly common, but actually finding an embryo inside these eggs is remarkably rare. But this paper reports that they found one, an exceptionally preserved articulated oviraptorid embryo inside an elongatulithid egg from the late Cretaceous Heikou Formation in southern China. The authors found a fossil specimen labeled YLSNHM01266 housed at the Yinglang Stone Nature History Museum of Nan'an, China. The egg would have been taken from the Heikou Formation, which is known to be a fluvial deposit from the late Cretaceous. Upon investigating the embryo, the authors say the head, quote, lies ventrally to the body with the feet on either side and the back curled along the blunt pole of the egg in a posture unrecognized in non-avian dinosaur, but reminiscent of late-stage modern bird embryo. By comparing this observation to other, quote, late-stage oviraptorid embryos, suggests that these oviraptorids developed, quote, avian-like postures late in incubation, which in modern birds is related to coordinated embryonic movements associated with tucking, a behavior controlled by the central nervous system, critical for hatching success. Their observations and findings lead them to propose that such, quote, pre-hatching behavior, previously considered unique to birds, may have originated among non-avian theropods, which can be further investigated with additional discoveries by embryo fossils. So this becomes something like the chicken or the egg situation. They believe that these oviraptorids are showing that dinosaurs were already posturing inside eggs similar to what birds do before birds were doing it. Our second news story is a paper from March 2022, about a year ago, published in the Zoological Journal of the Linnaean Society, called Osteology and Phylogenetic Relationships of Ligabosaurus lianzi from the early Cretaceous of Neuquén Basin, Patagonia, Argentina. And it refers a new specimen to the holotype and provides more data to further understand this sauropod. New postcranial elements were assigned to the holotype specimen, which is known from the Lohan-Kura Formation. The authors have recognized several new morphological features of the pectoral and pelvic girdles and the cervical and caudal anatomy, which have helped more specifically classify the big sauropod as a non-titanosaurian Symphospondylon, more derived than Sauroposeidon. This has some paleogeographical implications for the diversification and distribution of South American Symphospondylons, especially in the Neuquén Basin, where the sauropods are closely related to the early stages of evolution of Titanosauria. Quote, in this context, says the paper, Ligabosaurus represents one of the more complete early Cretaceous titanosauriforms and the earliest non-titanosaurian Symphospondylon of South America. Now that's a good question. What the heck is a Symphospondylon? So this is sort of a point in evolution where an animal either branches towards becoming more like a Brachiosaurus or a Titanosaurus. Animals like this are found on all the continents, apparently. Ligabosaurus lianzi was first described in 2006. It was based on an incomplete maxilla with 10 teeth, 6 cervical and dorsal vertebrae, and several associated girdle and limb bones. And at that time it was believed to be a basal titanosaur due to the development of its relatively long forelimbs with a humerus-femur ratio of 0.9. Apparently that is important. So another drop in the bucket that helps the phylogenetic analysis machine to continue doing its good work, telling us more and more about all those sauropods out there. All right, with the dinosaur news and the corrections and all that stuff out of the way, please let me introduce you to my very special guest this episode. So joining me today on this episode is a paleontology education and outreach coordinator for the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, a postdoctoral researcher for North Carolina State University, as well as an author and historian specializing on paleontology and genetics. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Elizabeth D. Jones. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Dr. Jones and I met coming out of a movie theater where they just finished screening a double feature of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But not Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because I don't like that movie as much. And it was just a complete coincidence that your name is Dr. Jones and the main character in those timeless films is also Dr. Jones, and nobody made any tasteless jokes about that at all. So thank you for joining me today.
That's great, because I've actually never seen any of those movies all the way through.
Oh, really? Really?
Not as an adult. As a kid, yes, but not as an adult. So this weekend I'll put it on my to-do list.
Okay. You haven't seen any of the Indiana Jones? My cat is named Indiana Jones.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. No, I mean, I watched them when I was younger, but I have not recently.
Man, as a Dr. Jones, that should be like right in your wheelhouse, but okay.
I know. I'm not living up to my name at all.
I promised my wife I wasn't gonna tease you about your name at all. But I'm so excited to talk to a Dr. Jones, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've considered changing it. Elizabeth Jones could easily be changed to Indiana Jones.
It could be North Carolina Jones.
That's right. All right, more and more ideas. I have not thought about that one.
But like I said, my wife is going to be listening to this episode under protest because I swore I wasn't going to tease you about the name. Anyhow, what?
You're actually, I don't get that a lot, so it's not overused yet.
Yeah,
so.
I'm a Mr. Rogers, and I don't get Mr. Rogers all the time either, and that's fine.
Oh, yeah, that is funny.
My neighborhood
nice
and all
to meet
that.
Mr. Rogers.
Welcome to the neighborhood. All right. So I wanted to start off asking you about the Hell Creek Formation outreach work that you do. I wanted to start off asking about being a coordinator of Cretaceous creatures and ask you specific Cretaceous carnivore questions and a very specific hadrosaur question I've got. I wanted to start off asking you about dinosaur exhibits at the North Carolina Museum of Natural History and how do you pronounce the SECU Lab or the SECU Lab?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a good question. Well, just State Employee Credit Union.
Okay.
So I think it's SECU Lab.
And I certainly want to ask you about the Dueling Dinosaurs, but if I started with any of that, which I want to do, I don't know if we'd ever have time to talk about Jurassic Park. So for anyone listening, Dr. Elizabeth D. Jones has done something really incredible with the cultural impact of Jurassic Park and written a whole nonfiction book about the intersections between science, research, media, and the public and celebrity status, kind of like rising out of the global impact of what Jurassic Park did to us. And so of all the things I want to ask you about, I also want to ask you about this. Let's start off with like getting to know each other a little bit. Tell me about your familiarity with the movie and the novel Jurassic Park.
Let's go back to the first time I saw Jurassic Park. I was 7 years old, and it terrified me, so I stopped watching it.
Yeah.
And I didn't watch it again until I was in college and started doing research on the history of ancient DNA research and realizing that Jurassic Park couldn't just be an afterthought. It was something that was, at least in popular culture, the core of what ancient DNA research was. So I did my homework, which was pretty fun homework. I read Jurassic Park for the first time, and I watched the movie. And that really helped, I guess, give a good handle on the popular side of what public were when they were first introduced to ancient DNA research. This is for the most part, what they were introduced to. So not just the science behind it, but what could be done with the science, which was, as we know, bringing back dinosaurs.
What could be possibly done with this? the fascination of it. So, like, I like to think that the novel is a bestseller. The novel is very good, and everybody loves it. But really, what made Jurassic Park the phenomenon was the movie. The movie, was shot out of a cannon, or whatever the expression is. It was bigger than life. It had a global impact, and it has had a lasting impact ever since, and in noticeable ways. And that's kind of really interesting in terms of what you've done with the book in terms of researching the history of how people have been influenced into investigating ancient DNA, what that means, and the popularization of everybody sort of knowing that, oh yeah, we can clone dinosaurs or not, and how they get familiar with that. Did you love the movie? Did you like the movie? Did you like the book? What were your impressions when you got through them?
Well, I didn't read Jurassic Park and I didn't watch Jurassic Park from a disinterested perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I don't think I got the experience to just read it or watch it for the fun of it, because I had my historian of science and my sociologist of science hat on the whole time. But yes, I absolutely loved it for that reason, because a lot of what people like to talk about is that, the science and the science fiction of Jurassic Park. And so, yes, that is very much important for me, like where that influence starts. Like, was it science influencing culture, or was it culture influencing science? And really, when we look at some of the historical evidence, we see that it's a bit of both. And that's what's fascinating about both the book and the movie, and the entire history of ancient DNA research, which we're talking about from the 1980s to today, is that it's really this give and take. And it's not, it's the question of the chicken or the egg. And the point is that it doesn't matter so much where it started. The point is that it's a ongoing influence and relationship, and tracing that is really fascinating. So I loved the book and I loved the movie for, the sheer entertainment, but then the way that the science of ancient DNA research and also dinosaur paleontology, like in terms of how dinosaurs were depicted as, their looks, but also their behavior, that was fascinating from an entertainment, but also an educational point of view. Even if some things weren't so accurate, you could dive into why aren't they so accurate and what is. So that's the value there, I think.
So your book is called Ancient DNA, The Making of a Celebrity Science. It's published by Yale University Press in 2022, and I'm told it reveals the untold story of the rise of a new scientific field, ancient DNA research, and how Jurassic Park and popular media influenced its development. The inspiration to begin asking these questions about how did Jurassic Park affect science? When did you start asking these questions, and how did this eventually become something like, you know what, I'm going to write a book about this whole thing?
So let me tell you an embarrassing story.
Oh, no.
And it's actually not so embarrassing because I put it in the preface of my book. So I guess I'm over it. It's really telling because it explains how I got into this field, which is very much, it was just by accident. If we want to call it accident, you can call it many things. But long story short, I was an undergrad at North Carolina State University. A really famous paleontologist, Mary Schweitzer, had just been hired. I was a naive freshman, a non-science student, needed to take a science elective. I took Dinosaurian World because I thought it'd be easy. It wasn't easy. It was incredibly difficult. It was taught by Mary Schweitzer. And I remember watching on TV that one of the science channels, I think it was Discovery Channel, was talking about this big documentary they were going to do about a scientist who had claimed that they found proteins from a T-Rex. And I thought, that is insane. So after class one day, I asked her, I said, there's this documentary about this paleontologist that claims to have found proteins from a T-Rex. Like, what? Have you heard of this work? What is it? Like, do you believe it? And she just smiled at me and said, well, why don't you watch it? And then we can talk about it. And so I did. And I was absolutely mortified. Oh my goodness. The whole thing was about her groundbreaking research, the reason why she had the position at NC State. And I mean, I was just clueless. And from then on, I just was fascinated by how much her work was celebrated for its pioneering efforts, but also how much it was heavily criticized because it was a pioneering effort. And it was carrying so much of that baggage, if we want to call it that, from Jurassic Park. And so I wanted to look into not necessarily, proteins, ancient proteins, but I wanted to look into the ancient DNA aspect. And reading the scientific articles all of them pretty much, was challenging for me as a historian, but you have to learn to do it if you're going to write about it. And then I got a good overlay of the field, but realized that it was missing a critical component, which was, I think, the lived experiences of the scientists who were still, for the most part, alive and practicing, and to use their memories of growing up in this field and the successes and the hardships, but then also the role of popular culture in all of that. So as I started exploring it, talking to scientists, interviewing them, it became very, very clear how much of a role that media generally played in the development of this theme called ancient DNA research, and as well as how much Jurassic Park was kind of like the flagship, like popular cultural icon that carried them through, especially during some of their toughest times. It was just such interesting material that I couldn't not write a book about it. Another fun fact, I never wanted to write a book. Never. As a historian, I remember learning about the book writing process and thinking, who would want to do that? And here I am, and I'm glad I did. It's because when you have wonderful information that really shows you about the process of science, but also is preserving some of these scientists' memories of it, it's, perhaps a moral obligation to share it.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like the interviewing process was a big part of capturing that sentiment around the height. Like, people don't write down, I guess, the cultural zeitgeist when they're writing a paper. You kind of you live that, but yeah, that doesn't become a matter of record in a way.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, unless somebody goes out and gets it and does that intentionally. So capturing that sentiment is more challenging to put into the public record than maybe you might think at first glance. And so, interesting work. How many interviews do you think that you did off the top of your head? Can you recall?
Yeah, I did just over 50.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was incredible, because when I could, I traveled around to the labs to meet the people and to also interview postdocs and grad students. So to get a whole spread of the different generations of ancient DNA researchers, so the ones who were there in the very early days when it wasn't even a thing you could do, to the students who are coming into something that's pretty well established. And so yeah, 50 scientists, and they came from all different backgrounds. Some were geneticists, some paleontologists or paleobotanists, epidemiologists, archaeologists, the whole array.
Wow.
And they were primarily in North America and Europe and Australia.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose all English speaking as well.
For the most part, or at least could. And because that's one thing that my book doesn't do that needs to be done, is to include those scientists that are doing amazing work in ancient DNA in non-English speaking countries. South America, there's a lot of great work going on, but that's my personal limitation, is that I don't speak any other language than English, and that is to my disadvantage to get a more robust global picture.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to start somewhere, but that is hopefully in the plan down the road.
Mm-hmm. Well, those must have been fascinating interviews. So people were talking about, how much did Jurassic Park feature in these interviews that you were doing? Were people like, obviously they were inspired to do the work, they were doing interesting things, collecting either soft tissues or DNA samples. Did Jurassic Park come up a lot? What was your experience with in the interviews regarding the popularity of the film?
Jurassic Park was talked about by every interviewee. Also partly because my questions were about, I did ask them about their research, how they got into it, and then also their interactions with or opinions of media work around their research, and also about Jurassic Park. But every interviewee talked extensively, either positively or negatively, or more or less neutrally, about the role of Jurassic Park. And researchers from different generations talked about it. So some of our younger researchers they called it the Jurassic Park Effect. And what we mean by that is a couple of the best examples out there that have some really strong oral evidence, but historical evidence as well, and scientific evidence is the influence that Jurassic Park, the film, specifically had on grant funding and publication timings, researcher recruitment, and then also like setting research agendas. So one real quick that everyone really likes to talk about is in 1993, when the movie was coming out, a team of researchers in California were trying to do the Jurassic Park Hypothesis thing. So extracting DNA from an insect in amber. And they did. And this insect in amber was 135 million years old, and it was a little weevil. And they published the results in Nature. And they were published on June 10th, 1993. And historians love dates, but this date is particularly important because it was the day after the Jurassic Park movie premiere and the day before its public release in movie theaters across the US. So that timing caused a huge media splash, and the authors said it was a coincidence. The journal, no comment. But here's the thing is that Nature and its counterpart Science are journals that do publish rigorous scientific research, but they are in the business of being appealing to the general public. And so they do cater to professional and popular interest. And this was one of those things that was certainly both. So you see this big influence around that. It put ancient DNA on the map.
Mm-hmm.
And it influenced research agendas, like at the Natural History Museum in London. A huge grant went to actually test out, quote unquote, the Jurassic Park hypothesis. And big bummer in every effort they made to replicate results of getting insect DNA from amber specimens, they were unable to. I think they said something pretty funny in their scientific article that said, we failed spectacularly, or like we failed in every way imaginable. And so that really debunked the whole Jurassic Park hypothesis. And that wasn't just something that had a momentary impact. It had a widespread impact on the entirety of the field and for the duration of ancient DNA research, because people really took a step back and said, we thought we could do this million-year-old DNA thing, and we can't. Mm-hmm. Is this really a reliable approach to studying ancient creatures? What can we really do with it? It caused a huge backlash among some of the more conservative scientists to really rein in the popularity and the celebrity of this new science in order to create some more realistic expectations, but also, save their careers in the process.
Well, you make an interesting point, and I've heard you say this, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but when you start hearing about coincidences, that the paper just happened to come out the exact day that the film was debuting, is a little bit like, maybe you're not being entirely truthful about this coincidence. But you spoke of figurative contamination. It's this fascinating idea that this celebrity of cloning an ancient DNA and all these ideas contaminates the process, as opposed to like actually the experiment itself. It doesn't mean that there's actually things getting in there, but your approach to the process, your approach to the science, your funding for the science, your plans to do the science, all of these things can be figuratively contaminated by the celebrity of in this case, ancient DNA and cloning dinosaurs. Did that come up a lot? Like during your interviews, did people talk about like how this influence is like harming the scientific process in a way?
Yes, absolutely. So even researchers that benefited from the celebrity of their science did express reservations around it, and noticing the negative consequences, whether it was media taking the implications of the results too far, so going on about the de-extinction possibility, the bringing back of extinct creatures, whatever they may be, or whether it was colleagues that were negative about it. But the thing is that it was hard to do in the book, but as a historian, it's very difficult to separate what evidence you're putting out there and what that portrays, and not saying that you are the one saying this. So these perceived, abuses of celebrity in the ancient DNA world were mainly scientists' perceived abuses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm collecting that information and I'm putting it out there, and analyzing it. But what you really see too is that yes, there's this very clear understanding of wanting to be in the media spotlight, but being wary about that, because once you put your results out there, your message out there, or that quote out there, you lose control over it. And that's the way it is with all science, but you see it particularly well in ancient DNA research because it's the celebrity science, so it's an extreme of it. But what's amazing about this community of researchers is really across the board, they're very savvy with the media. So I wouldn't call them outright celebrity scientists in their own, although there are, of course, people like Svante Pääbo, who, he's also just won the Nobel Prize, who would come very close. But they're very savvy with the media, and they understand their need for the media. And we can be a little bit cynical or reductionist and say, well, this is just how science works in a capitalistic society.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, that's true, but they're very well aware of this relationship between getting press for whatever reason in whatever high profile journal in order to get, more high profile press, in order to get more money to do more research. And it's this cycle. One of the researchers called it a self-perpetuating system. And so they understood the stakes of really engaging with a relationship with the media, especially around this Jurassic Park notion. But it was something that was really important for them to do, especially when what they were trying to do didn't even exist as a research program or as a clear funding possibility. So they had to make the case for themselves in order to get to the point to where they could see what was possible. And yeah, I think a lot of scientists would say there's a lot of heartbreak along the way, not just in the lab, but out in public, out with the media, and how that influenced what they did or didn't do in the lab as a consequence.
That's interesting. In terms of, like you mentioned how you put it out there and then it becomes kind of like it belongs to the public in a way. And I think that's a big element of celebrity is once there's an image out there and it's an image of you or in this case it's ancient DNA. Maybe we talk about like what impacts has the celebrity status of ancient DNA in terms of becoming a celebrity. What are the good and the bad that comes with it being so visibly popular with everyone?
So is your question what is the good and the bad of it becoming so popular?
It's helped the field, but I'm sure it's also hindered the field in some respects.
Yeah.
What did your interviews reveal in terms of the good and the bad, the yin and the yang of being super popular?
Yeah, the good is that. Okay, gosh, there's a million things running through my head. So the first thing I think is just the general recognizability of something that's pretty niche, extracting DNA from fossils. And when you can say, sort of like the Jurassic Park premise, and people have this image, like you said, this celebrity image already out there that's, it's like commodifying in a sense the science, not the scientists, but what you can do in science. And that's something that's extremely beneficial because people can hold on to it and they pay attention. And then you can go from there to talk about the nuances. What's science, what's science fiction, what we actually do in the lab, as scientists like to say. And also because of that, one researcher said that, the media always calls them because when they've got nothing, they know that someone in their lab is going to have something really interesting because they're doing something on ancient humans or even dinosaurs, and of course, like the mammoth. And there's so many celebrity specimens within the field, and also really, really difficult, technical, groundbreaking research that's going on. It's just something that everyone wants to know about, and somehow all of the time. And that is a good thing for getting their research communicated, and also then in turn getting it funded, because that is a key piece, not just for the sake of bragging, because there's this bigger movement in science communication for scientists to have a duty, in a sense, to communicate their research to the public. And then on the flip side of it is that, that when you lose control of the message, and a lot of researchers were particularly grumpy about certain other researchers that seemed to be too bold in their claims and too frivolous with their methods. As I say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so there's a lot of resentment at certain scientists who were putting out certain results in certain journals. So one of them is a team claimed to have found dinosaur DNA. Later turned out that some other researchers in ancient DNA tried to replicate it. They found out that it was actually human DNA that they had replicated. So, extremely embarrassing. And it was embarrassing for them because what one team did had an effect on the collective, and vice versa. And what was at stake was their reputation and their further funding, and they didn't want to seem like a joke. In a lot of cases, it was coming across like that, especially in the 90s. But here I want to say it's important to take a step back and, yes, realize the role that celebrities playing, but to realize that any new science has to do the hard work of seeing what's possible and what's not possible. And that requires a lot of trial and error and a lot of success and failure. And it just so happened that in a celebrity science, a lot of their failure was out there in the public, not behind closed doors in the labs, but it was out there for everyone to see. And that's what was especially difficult. And that's what a lot of my interviewees particularly either just noticed and were resentful of.
And that's the downside of being very famous is your mistakes are become public knowledge as well.
Yes. Yep. Your whole being.
Your whole being. So you did all the research. You spoke to 50 interviewees. How close are we to cloning a dinosaur after all?
Just jump right to it. Yeah. We are not close at all, not to a dinosaur, because dinosaur DNA has not been found yet. And people will be annoyed that I said yet. But here's the thing, is that it could be there somewhere and we just haven't found it. Also, it's not just a matter of finding it, but it's a matter of extracting it and sequencing it, and sequencing enough of it. And then there are a million other considerations after that. So really, ancient DNA, or getting it, is just the first step, or one possible first step, in bringing back any kind of extinct creature. And so the dinosaur is a no-go. Pretty hard line on that right now. But there are some other animals out there that I think I really do think that will be seen maybe soonish.
Okay. So I heard there might be a rat or something, like some rodent that they were thinking of cloning, and then everybody seems to be, it's famously the mammoth. Are these things that are like on the horizon?
Yeah, I really do think the mammoth is on the horizon. Wow. And I say that because, all right, so let's go back. In the media, this idea of bringing back a mammoth has been around since the 1980s. And it got out there really because an undergraduate wrote a fictional story about some scientists resurrecting the mammoth, and a newspaper got hold of it and thought it was legit. and they published it, and it went like wildfire across the globe. And then it had to be, of course, retracted or explained that no, a student wrote this, it's not the real deal. But long story short is that it's that possibility has just stuck with us. And people have been saying, a number of researchers have been saying for a while that we're almost there, we're getting closer with the mammoth. Also another organism called the thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger. Really, really interesting creature that looks like kind of like a tiger, kind of like a dog, and it eats meat, but it's a marsupial. So really, really bizarre. But the mammoth is really on the horizon because George Church, who is a Harvard geneticist, is behind this effort. It's a new organization called Colossal, as in new, like just announced formally a year ago.
Okay.
And George Church is important because he brings a lot of credibility to what people used to refer to as crazy ideas. So a lot of my interviewees, their opinion of de-extinction, they called it things like, they said it's crazy, it's ludicrous, it's mad, it's a freak idea. They didn't think too highly of it, morally or given the biological or the technological features that you would need in order to accomplish it. But George Church and his team are doing something different because they have this technology called CRISPR, which you've probably heard of. I'm not an expert, but in a really rude explanation of it, it's like a cut and paste feature. So you go into the genome, if you've got it, and you cut out the bits you want, insert them in to another genome where you want them in order to change what is perhaps phenotypically expressed. So like on the outside, so if you don't want just an elephant, but maybe a hairy elephant.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do in order to get some sort of mammoth. Philosophically, though, is that just a mammoth? I don't know. One of my interviewees said it would just be a hairy elephant.
Yeah.
And what's the difference? And so there are a lot of questions around there about what makes a species, and how far do we have to go in order to say we've resurrected one. So yeah, with that technology, with this credibility, and with tons of money behind it, it's something that I think we can seriously expect. I don't know when. I don't know if that's like 10 years or 20 or 30 but where there's a will, there's a way, I suppose.
That's amazing. Well, I'm trying to think. I think I heard that like the ancient Egyptians lived in the same world as mammoths. So like they're not so extinct that they were from ages and ages ago. So they might, the world's very different now than it was then.
Yeah.
It'd be very interesting to see what they do. Well, I think Michael Crichton has cautioned us against doing that. But who are we to say it wouldn't be fascinating, and go for it.
Yeah, it's this idea that everyone, or at least a lot of the scientists, are tired of hearing about, but there's just something about it that we can't get away from. And it's probably that idea that we're bringing back to life something that stopped existing.
If they do bring back a mammoth, I insist that they call it Snuffleupagus. That's important to me.
Oh, absolutely.
That must be his name.
Absolutely. Oh, with big long eyelashes.
Yes. We'll toggle that gene. Toggle that one way up with big eyelashes. Snuffy's got eyelashes. Okay, bird. So one of the things that everybody knows about Dr. Jones is that Dr. Jones belongs in a museum, and that's where you spend your time. You're saying some of your work is with the Hell Creek Formation community outreach. What sort of things about the Hell Creek Formation do the public you reach out to get the most excited about?
Right. So this is all a part of a public science project called Cretaceous Creatures, and it's unique because it's the largest one to date. And what we're doing is our team of paleontologists here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, we go out to Montana to the Hell Creek Formation, the area near where the dueling dinosaurs were found, which for your listeners, if they don't know, I'm sure they will know soon. The dueling dinosaurs are an exquisite fossil find. It's a supposed tyrannosaur and a triceratops, nearly perfectly preserved, and locked in seeming battle. So one of the questions that the researchers here are going to figure out is, were they locked in battle, something really wonderful and dramatic, or was it something more like, their skeletons were washed near each other and they, preserved like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing is we're taking tons and tons of sediment. So basically bags of dirt from the Hell Creek Formation. We bring them back here to North Carolina and we distribute them into little boxes. So every student across North Carolina that participates gets a little box of dirt. But in the box of dirt are very, very tiny microfossils. So really tiny teeth or bones or shells or scales of all the organisms that lived alongside the dueling dinosaurs, which is pretty incredible. So what they're doing is they are discovering their own microfossils. And these are fossils that no scientists have seen before. So we get the bags of dirt and we distribute them out to them. So they're the first ones seeing and touching these real 66 million year old fossils. And on top of that, they get to identify them. So we have an online module that's does your fossil look like this? Does it look like this? That helps them to learn how to identify fossils and then make a decision, select their confidence in what they found, and submit that data back to us at the museum. We verify it, and then paleontologists across the world can use this, what will be a massive database. And it's pretty awesome because it's a 4-year project. It's all across North Carolina. Then we're going to expand nationally and then internationally. So we're going to have 8th grade scientists all over the world helping us collect real scientific data and hopefully feeling like they're a part of a bigger process and effort.
That's really neat. I know that when we go out with the kids, that keeping your eye on the ground and finding like an impression of a fossil or some of that in a rock is it's so much fun. And just looking at it and trying to figure out what it is. And you'll never know. I don't know what they are. But they look like a little, I don't know, horn or something like that. Like just a tube with a shell or some sort. But yeah, getting a whole bunch of like microfossils would be so fascinating to look at. And I can imagine that'd be very engaging. That's cool. And so that's for 4 years. How long have you been doing that then? Like where in the process are you?
I'm a year into it. Mm-hmm. So we formally launched this past fall. And so we're doing North Carolina this year and then North Carolina next year, and then we'll expand out to teachers and students.
Okay.
In year 3. So we've made some really good progress in the sense we've got about 55 teachers across the state participating, which means about 4,500 students.
Wow.
And so far, from really just 16 teachers and their students, they've already identified about 1,000 microfossils.
Wow. I was going to say, how are they doing? Are they are they giving you good results?
That's a good question. Okay, so here's the thing. They get it right about 50% of the time.
Okay.
So, from an educational perspective, that's phenomenal.
Okay.
Because these are 8th graders that have never really heard of a microfossil, have never seen one, and have never tried to identify one. And, I'm not a microfossil expert, but, I have a heck of a hard time sometimes identifying them myself. So the fact that they get it right 50% of the time means that the online module that they're following is helping them, and also that they're really engaging with the critical thinking and the comparing and contrasting. And so we're pretty proud of them and their 50-50 accuracy.
That's really neat. So another part of what I see that you do is you're a coordinator for Cretaceous Creatures, which is cool.
Yes.
So what other creatures besides dinosaurs do you focus on from the Cretaceous?
Yeah, that's really fun because a lot of the creatures are sort of like creatures we have around today. So most people think dinosaurs.
Mm.
So yes, there are some Triceratops teeth, some Tyrannosaur teeth, some of the classics in our microfossil sediment. But we also have like little tiny mammal teeth, so like sort of like little mice. There's also lots of lizards. There's turtles. There are fish, and it's really, that's one thing we want to communicate to the students is that yeah, these paleo environments look pretty different, especially if you're looking at the big creatures or the dinosaurian creatures. But in what ways is that paleo environment similar to our own? What organisms did make it past that extinction boundary and have evolved and are thriving today in some form or another? It might sound like it's just a lizard, but it's pretty cool that it's a lizard that is that old and that we've got them around with us today.
That we still have them. Because one of the things I wonder when I think about dinosaurs, particularly carnivores, we always kind of, growing up anyhow, imagine that dinosaurs ate other dinosaurs. But the more I think about it, almost certainly the carnivores are going to be eating things that are like bite size, as opposed to, I mean, we have fossils that show that tyrannosaurs bit into the bones of really big herbivores. And I think that the Deinonychus was found with a skeleton of a Tenontosaurus, and so everybody who does paleo art of a Tenontosaurus has to have Deinonychus jumping all over it. But so we have some evidence, or some evidence has been presented anyhow, that dinosaurs are eating other dinosaurs. But in my head, I kind of rationalize that they must have also just been eating little things too, just bite-sized stuff that you don't have to, put your life on the line to eat. And so I wonder, like, are they eating? Do you suppose that they're eating just bugs, birds, fish, lizards, turtles? Is it more likely, do you think, that carnivores are just going for that sort of thing, or what percentage of their diet do you suppose was dinosaur?
Right. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will follow up with an answer because I don't know if we actually know, and two, if we do know, I don't know what the answer is. But you're absolutely right. Like, I love how you put it, is that go for a meal that's not putting your life on the line. Yeah. Like, don't be so dramatic every time you gotta eat. So it's, but absolutely, they were eating these smaller creatures, the carnivores, and that is something that we can confidently say that because we see extant creatures doing similar things today. You don't just necessarily eat one type of meat. You are opportunistic and you eat what is around. And that is something that we eventually want to get across with Cretaceous creatures as far as some more detailed lesson plans. So when the students find what they find, so say they found a couple of the mega predators, like evidence of the mega predators and fish and smaller mammals and all that kind of stuff, to have them create a food web of who ate who. And exactly like you said, it's sort of like broaden that understanding of, it's not just this dinosaur on dinosaur dramatic fight to the death, that it's sort of, what's the day-to-day? What does the day-to-day meal look like? And as part of a bigger understanding of the ecology and how everything and everyone work together. So I love that you brought that up, because you're very right. That is very much in the public perception. I mean, even mine. That's just what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's because they're too famous. The celebrity of dinosaurs. They must be just fighting each other. That's the way we think of it. But
of course, right.
Yeah, if I had to eat, I don't know if I'd go and try and kill a dinosaur to eat. That'd just be hard. Have you seen these things?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're plumb out of time. I wish we had more. Where could people find the book if they were looking to learn more about what you're doing there, or if they want to learn more about the museum? Where would you recommend people go look to find more details?
Yes. So the book is available online, all major book retailers. So I guess I should promote Amazon because it is easy to get a book on Amazon, and also they discount it sometimes.
Okay.
So please go purchase it wherever you like to buy your books. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me at Dr. Dino DNA. So that's at Dr. Dino DNA,
Cool.
Twitter and Instagram. And then absolutely visit our museum website, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh, and actually come visit us and come by and see our lab on the third floor. We are in a big glass lab, so we're kind of like fish in a fishbowl, and you can walk by and watch us as we work. We have a lot of really cool research going on here, from dinosaur eggs to, T-Rex stuff,
And
all the good things you think of.
and the dueling dinosaurs. That is an incredible. You're a historian.
Right.
What will a historian say in 50 years on what was learned from the dueling dinosaurs?
Oh, yeah. So the Dino Lab exhibit should be opening this fall, and the dueling dinosaurs are going to be on display. And not just on display, but you will be able to come in and stand right next to them and stand right next to my colleagues who are going to be working on them. So what would historians say about it? Well, I actually do hope to write a book on this at some point, so maybe
Cool.
it'll be what I say in 50 years. But what's fascinating to me is where the dueling dinosaurs came from and how they were found and what their journey was from the field. They were found by Clayton Phipps, a dinosaur cowboy, and it had a pretty rocky journey to get here to a public museum, where it could be made available to scientists and the public, which is one of the values of the scientific community is. And so having this specimen here was difficult, but important and interesting, because whatever scientists do find will be made publicly available, for others to see and study. And I think what probably the public will be most interested to find out from the dueling dinosaur specimens is, what kind of tyrannosaur this is. Is it, the classic Tyrannosaurus Rex? Is it something else? Most likely something else.
Oh.
And then, what were they doing together, the Triceratops and the Tyrannosaur? How did they die, and what can we know about that? To what degree of confidence? That is probably what a lot of the public are really interested in.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned before the Tyrannosaur would appear to be fully articulated. Is the Triceratops as well?
Pretty much, yeah.
As far as you know? Because I imagine it's still just a great big rock, right? I mean, they haven't been prepared yet.
Yeah, it is. Like, they had told me it was a ton of rock, and it is a ton of rock. Some of the specimen has been prepped enough, exposed enough from the jackets that, like the most photogenic parts of the Tyrannosaur and Triceratops. But then the rest of the skeleton are still in big old jackets in the basement, and it's going to be one heck of a time that someone other than me obviously is going to have getting those massive things of rock up and into the Dino Lab. So that should be happening, I think, maybe this summer or early fall. So I'm really excited to watch that. Wow. And I'll have to close my eyes probably half the time. But
That's amazing. That's amazing.
It is. It's I actually pinch myself daily because one, I never wanted to do this kind of work because I didn't know it was possible. But I mean, I'm just the lab here is incredible for the science they do, but they're also just kind people, which is key. And the fact that the dueling dinosaurs are here, and I get to kind of watch it, sort of be a part of it to some extent, is pretty remarkable. So stay tuned.
For sure. Yeah, you can't miss that. The dueling dinosaurs. That'll be in the news. Awesome.
Of course. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, yeah, you're very fun to talk to. Yeah.
Oh, go on. All
Got
right.
me thinking about some good stuff, and also you word themes in ways that I haven't thought about, and it sounds really good and it gets the point across. So yeah, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome. Thank you for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope you had fun. A big thank you to Dr. Elizabeth Jones. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. So our text this week is the fifth iteration and the chapter Search. The fifth iteration, the quote from Malcolm's report, as I believe it to be, is flaws in the system will now become severe on 269. And in a synopsis of the chapter, Gennaro and Muldoon investigate the site of the Hadrosaur stampede when Arnold radios them saying that he's found Nedry's stolen jeep. Meanwhile, Grant awakens in the raft, flowing down the river to Lex and Tim quarreling about their dad, while Microceratopses, or if you have a different type of book, maybe they're Colovosaurus up there, but I don't think that's right, bounce in the branches above them. When Muldoon and Gennaro reach the second jeep, they find Nedry's corpse and don't bother collecting him, but do prioritize the weaponry before returning to the site of the stampede. But there's no sign of the big Rex, so they have to wait for her to reappear. Meanwhile, Grant and the kids flow up to the aviary, and they climb out of the raft in search of a telephone or motion sensors. All right, stuff that the characters do. We have Donald Gennaro. Gennaro overlooks the astonishing devastation from the Tyrannosaur attack on the Hadrosaur stampede on page 271. He doesn't make it 2 paragraphs into this scene without going back into question mode. What are we waiting for? Unarmed and unable to outrun the big Rex, Gennaro agrees to, quote, live dangerously with Muldoon. And then more questions on page 272. What is it? How do you know? How do you know the Tyrannosaur didn't come later? Gennaro appears more at peace with discovering Nedry's corpse than when he found Regis's remains on page 273, though he admits that the compies appear eerie to him. Gennaro retrieves the, quote, gray metal tubing from the rear of the Jeep. Nedry must have moved it because Muldoon put it in the passenger seat, right? But those are just details. I mean, Crichton was so careful about where those night vision goggles were between the 2 Land Cruisers earlier, but now he's all willy-nilly with the rocket launcher. But no matter, this isn't of great concern to us. Gennaro is intimidated by the rockets in the rocket launcher on 274 and takes a step back, almost stepping on Nedry's body. He carefully steps over Nedry's body, demonstrating he still dignifies humanity with some respect, unlike Muldoon. And he's filled with questions still. What are these? What about him? And Gennaro is like a bad contestant on Jeopardy, right? He doesn't know the answers, just questions. Robert Muldoon. Muldoon deduces simply that the Rex had caught a hadrosaur, perhaps by noticing the obvious flattened grass and blood stains, but also by the noticeably large number of flies. And also he's begun drinking. Recall, it's like 7:15 a.m., right? On 271. Muldoon is still apprehensive because they're entirely unarmed against the Tyrannosaur. Even being in a Jeep isn't going to help them outrun Big Rex, which Muldoon says can reach between 30 and 40 miles per hour. Muldoon asks Gennaro if he's ready to live dangerously, and Gennaro agrees. I like that Muldoon only asks people to do what they're comfortable doing, or at least with Gennaro anyhow, and I think he does it with Sadler too. That changes in the final scene when he has a cattle prod and Gennaro doesn't want to go down the rabbit hole, but we'll get to that in the end. Muldoon drives in concentric circles along the trampled earth. Recall it was 100 yards wide, so he circled the expanse of a football field in a concentric circle. That could take a while. And Muldoon discovers the remains of an infant hadrosaur in the field on 272. And Muldoon surveys the land and gives his interpretation of how the hunt went down by pointing out the differences in dino spores he finds at the site. He reports that they have, quote, another hadro dead, possibly suggesting that there has been more than one hadrosaur death. I don't know. In reacquiring the Jeep Nedry stole, Muldoon figures Nedry took a wrong turnoff, which is how he wound up by a concrete barrier in the Jungle River on 273. Wu has said Nedry stole 15 embryos worth between $2 million and $15 million. Muldoon reads the scene of Nedry's death and concludes that it was the Dilophosaurs that got him, not the compies. After all the damage at Jurassic Park, Muldoon has absolutely no sympathy for Nedry, saying that being blinded and ripped down the center is, quote, not a nice way to go, and adding, quote, maybe there's justice in this world after all. Muldoon heartlessly leaves Nedry behind to be scavenged by the compies. He's truly vindictive on 274. They return to the sauropod paddock with the rocket launcher, looking for the Rex this time on 275. Muldoon navigates in concert with Arnold over the radio, but they can't find the Tyrannosaur. He's becoming visibly drunk, as after Arnold clicks off, Muldoon repeats him sarcastically, checking now. And he's frustrated that Arnold hasn't made the Tyrannosaur a priority and know where she is at all times. It's literally a rampaging Tyrannosaurus. You tend to keep an eye on that sort of thing, but not Arnold. When Arnold can't find the Tyrannosaur, Muldoon switches his quarry. Perhaps they can rescue Grant and the kids while they're out here. But no, they're not showing up on the monitors either. Muldoon doesn't know what to do next. John Arnold. Muldoon and Arnold connect over the walkie-talkies on 272, and Arnold reports that he has found Nedry's Jeep. Arnold hasn't been keeping track of the Tyrannosaur in the control room, and now that he's looking for her, he can't find her. Quote, she's not showing up. Arnold can't find the kids with the motion sensors either, so he says they will all just have to wait. Dennis Nedry. With his plot discovered, Nedry's body is also found out in the park on 273. We've covered this before, but here we go. He appears indistinct and green because he's covered in compies who are scavenging on him when Muldoon and Gennaro arrive. His, quote, chubby, boyish face, now red and bloated. Flies buzzing around his gaping mouth with a thick tongue. His body is mangled, the intestines torn open, and one leg chewed through. Tim Murphy. On the Mesozoic Jungle River, Tim can hear the cry of birds and see small chirping dinosaurs sleeping among the branches on 274. They're chirping and sleeping. How do you like that? When Lex wishes her dad were with them because he always knows what to do, Tim becomes irate. In part, I think, because he detests his dad, but also in part, I think, because Lex was in a way slighting Dr. Grant, too. And Tim has, for all intents and purposes, adopted Grant on this trip as his new dad. In any case, Tim is far more comfortable yelling at Lex about his daddy issues than he is telling his own dad about them. So he yells at Lex. She lands a zinger in retort to his outburst, saying that she's dad's favorite, which hurts Tim. But she responds with some kindness, noting that her dad loves him too. Tim appears to try and build on that kindness by sharing what he knows about the Microceratops in the trees above them, but Lex doesn't get it. She doesn't care. Dr. Alan Grant. Grant looks at his watch, now awake from his snooze, and finds that it is 8 a.m. They've traveled 45 minutes north up the river on 274. The squabbling between Tim and Lex is eventually cut off by Grant upon sensing an issue upriver. He cancels their disagreement. Kids, shut up on 275. It doesn't work as planned, but it works out. They reach the aviary on page 276, and he's surprised at how large it is, and that there isn't any glass. Grant hasn't yet spotted anything in the aviary, but has suspicion that it contains large flying creatures. Grant recalls a lodge in the aviary and plans to stop to check for a phone or motion sensors. He is eager to connect with the control room about those raptors on the boat. Lex Murphy. She's trying to snatch some berries from the foliage above the raft after noticing the Microceratops are eating them on 274. She becomes frustrated with Grant's denial. Recall she's been complaining about being hungry since they first saw the big Rex way back yesterday afternoon before they met the sick Stegosaurus, and she hasn't eaten since then yet. In any case, she's upset with Grant, and she says she wishes her daddy were here. Daddy always knows what to do, and despite Tim's outburst, she is unfazed. She loves and misses her dad, and she gets petty about it, teasing Tim for not being dad's favorite. But she's sensitive that the comment may have stung a bit. So she reassures Tim that Daddy likes you too. But when Tim reciprocates by sharing some dino knowledge with her, she hasn't any time for that. Only very young boys are interested in dinosaurs, she replies, as if she's too mature for dinosaurs. On 275. When Grant asks her to shut up, she is all, I can do whatever I want, which is such a piss-off, but a blood-curdling shriek from somewhere downriver gives her reason enough to listen. Oh, that's all it takes. Merely life-and-death situations, or else you won't be cooperative for anyone, eh? Big sports fan. She's not a team player, though. Ultimately, right, we're supposed to think she's just a brat, I'm sure. Even to Lex, the aviary appears unfinished as they arrive on 276, but that it's lacking glass isn't a sign of incompletion. It just means that the birds are too big to escape through the panels. Mr. Murphy, daddy or dad, he obviously has a stronger relationship with Lex than with Tim, mostly based on similar interests. Mr. Murphy is a Mets fan who loves sports, as is Lex, whereas Tim is into computers on 274, and Lex emphasizes that Dad still loves him too. I feel like perhaps Mr. Murphy feels more closely connected with Lex, and as a result, Tim feels distant, overlooked, misunderstood, and that obviously has significant deleterious effects on his relationship with his dad. Tyrannosaurus. Muldoon says Big Rex can run down an off-road Jeep because she can reach speeds 30 to 40 miles per hour in 271. That's fast. Othnielia. When Muldoon and Gennaro start the Jeep's engine, two Othnelians are startled and leap out of the grass on 271. The Othnielia have been scavenging on the infant hadrosaur carcass, leaving little bites the Muldoon can identify on 272. They weren't expressly said to be herbivores earlier, but they were lumped in with the Hypsilophodons and considered dryosaurs, and are commonly understood to be herbivorous. So I don't know why Crichton has them nipping at this carcass, but unless he got them confused with the compies, who are routinely referred to as scavengers. Or I mean, it's not entirely unbelievable that an animal, something like an Othniellia, might have consumed or scavenged some meat in their diet. That's not unheard of either, but it's a strange choice for Crichton anyhow to make Othniellia scavenging on the hadrosaur carcass. Hadrosaurs. The hadrosaur spore is described as chalky and filled with uric acid, giving it a white appearance on 272. Also, the juvenile hadrosaur carcass has a tattoo on its right foot, HD/09, indicating that it is supposedly number 9 of the 11 animals bred in the park, right? Procompsognathus, referred to by its nickname, the Compies, quote, found Nedry on 273. They're green and swarming all over Nedry's carcass, scavenging. There are a dozen delicate little predators no larger than ducks, standing at the edge of the jungle, chittering excitedly. They have 5-fingered hands, and they wipe their faces and chins, giving them an eerily human quality. And finally, a Compy squats on Nedry's open mouth and nibbles the flesh on his nose. Squatting on Nedry's mouth makes the Compies perhaps intuitive Halo players, eager to teabag a fallen player's face. Nice one, Crichton. You're ahead of your time. Dilophosaurus. Apparently, you get about 2 hours to wash the toxic saliva out of your eyes with the antivenin to avoid permanent blindness. And that antivenin is kept all over the park on 273, we're told. Microceratops. These little animals chirp and leap among the branches, eating clusters of bright red berries on branches on 274. These are pale yellow colored, barely 2 feet tall, again size measured in height, as per Crichton's usual, with beaky heads like parrots on 275, we're told. In my edition, they're named Microceratops, though your edition may call them Microceratus. I don't know why. I don't quite understand what's going on there. I'm pretty sure your copy will have Microceratops up in the tree. Maybe you don't. I don't know. In my edition, they're named Microceratops. I don't know what might be in your edition. I know that Colovosaurus, for some reason, shows up in the list of animals on InGen's list in some editions of the book. I don't know why, nor can I fathom why they would change it. Colovosaurus, as we discussed in one of the earlier episodes, is like an iguanodon. It's not up in a tree. And it's also known from, like, scarce materials. Like, it doesn't make sense that Colovosaurus would be an animal that was chosen for this. Microceratops is kind of well understood. It would make sense that it is up in a tree, maybe. I don't get it. I don't know what's up there. If you have Colovosaurus up in the trees, please email me and let me know. I don't believe it. All right, we have localities. The sauropod paddock. The grass is trampled flat for 100 yards in every direction. One big palm tree was uprooted, and there was great washes of blood in the grass and on the rocky outcrop to the right, on 271, we're told. And that rocky outcrop, recall, was right where Grant and the kids had been during the stampede before fleeing up the largest tree. As 2 Othnielians emerge from the matted grass, we get another species of dinosaur in this paddock. That's the Triceratops, Hadrosaurs, Apatosaurs, Maiasaurs, both Rexes, though these are intruders, and now Othnielians. And recall, I'm sure Tim spotted a velociraptor running among the infant Hadrosaurs on the tour way back earlier as well, but nobody believed him back then. So almost everything is in this one paddock. The Jungle River. This was called the Mesozoic Jungle River on page 141, although not even once since then is it named that. However, as the river exits the lagoon and meanders north, it becomes, quote, narrower, we're told on 274. Here the banks close in on both sides and the foliage overhead meets in the middle. The aviary. The aviary has a, quote, big dome which rises above our protagonists in the raft on 275. It's enormous, 1/4 mile in diameter or more on page 276, we're told. It has a pattern of geodesic struts which shine dully through the light mist. A thin mesh hangs inside each of the struts, and there is no glass. And the Jungle River flows through the aviary, and they can float beneath the edge of the dome in their raft on page 276. The dome is so high, you can't see its roof through the mist. That's kind of neat. Inside there is a lodge, which is visible, quote, over the tops of the trees to the north on 276. This is ahead of them as the river runs north, generally speaking. The shore of the river is a muddy bank, not a trough or concrete moat, and they disembark their raft and have to walk through a dense forest of palm trees to reach the lodge. Remember that it was so misty you couldn't see the ceiling of the aviary, because I think in the next chapter it's so sunny you can see shadows on the ground. Pay attention to that. That'll be interesting. Stylistic techniques. Italics. He never knows what to do on 274 emphasizes Tim in response to Lex's statement that she thinks her dad always has a plan. She wasn't even talking to Tim, so this is quite the outburst from Tim. That doesn't make it any less sincere. The emphasis is on never, emphasizing how much trust Tim and his dad have built up, which is not very much. Not if they're big birds. On 276, says Grant, alluding to the pterosaurs he's yet to spot in the aviary, but he suspects they're going to be quite large. Colon, quote, he was astonished by what looked like a battleground. Colon, the grass was trampled flat for 100 yards in every direction on 271. Here the colon separates a statement, and an explanation, which is fine. Semicolons. Quote, you've got about 2 hours to wash it out with the anti-venom. Semicolon. We keep it all around the park, just in case, on 273. And the semicolon returns, bringing formality back to Muldoon's conversations. Here, 2 thoughts on the importance of anti-venom and the availability of anti-venom are connected with the semicolon. Grant had seen it only from a distance, semicolon. Now he realized it was enormous, 1/4 of a mile in diameter or more, on 276. Here, 2 clauses are joined together, firstly stating a state of perspective for Grant, and then his newly informed perspective of the aviary afterwards. Ellipses, quote, just because you're not his favorite, ellipsis, on 274, where this emphasis is a final jab, leaving the space open for retort, even though there's nothing left to say. Lex has won this argument. M dash, the body was indistinct in green, M dash, but then green shapes scattered away as the Jeep pulled to a stop, on 273. Here the M dash serves as a fast-paced, informal semicolon. Quote, his body was mangled, M dash. The intestines torn open, one leg chewed through, on 273. And again, Crichton is relying on the M dash rather than a semicolon, I suppose, because this is informal. And while surveying the death scene of a saboteur who's betrayed you, costing lives, I guess one isn't necessarily interested in being formally polite. It's form and style coming together to deliver a stronger and artistic message, which is good. Quote, they wiped their faces and chins, giving them an eerily human quality, which M dash, on 273. And this M dash serves as an interruption, as Gennaro's observations were cut off when Muldoon begins reading Nedry's trauma, and concludes it was the Dilophosaur what killed him, not the compies. Watch it, M dash. You don't want to step in something, on 275. Says Muldoon crudely. The M dash serves as a quick interruption to get Gennaro's attention, to cause him pause. Quote, then as they came closer, he saw there wasn't any glass, M dash, just struts, on 276. And here the M dash serves as a comma, separating Grant's expectations from his observations. Exclamation, look, look, on 275, says an uncredited voice before we turn the page, but we can guess that it's Lex. She's the most exclamatory character in the novel. It's surely her. Let's discuss some of the other things here. We have the iterations. This is a new iteration for us, and the chapter begins with flaws in the system will now become severe, on 269. But the big element that differentiates this segment from the previous works is the velociraptors. Yes, the Tyrannosaur is bad. Yes, escaping through the park has been bad. But everyone was still operating under the presumption that they were very close to having everything back under control, or beyond underlying instabilities appearing. Now we're in flaws in the system are now severe. And we get all the power off, which leads to the raptors being out. All the failures in the park, the containment and safety in particular, but the elements of control come falling away in this iteration. The illusion of control begins to fall apart. Now it's a desperate rush to see whose will to survive is greater, man or velociraptor. In the last iteration, it was about holding on to hope. This iteration is just survival at all costs. Timeline. As of page 274, it is 8 a.m. Recall that Robert Muldoon has already begun drinking whiskey. Contrivances and plot. In this chapter, Muldoon says that Wu said Nedry stole 15 embryos worth between $2 and $5 million. We know, however, that's not accurate. Nedry stole 15 types of embryos, and in fact took 2 samples of each. As reported, quote, Nedry quickly took 2 of each, slipping them into the shaving cream can, on page 176. Once again, a fun trivia question to stump your friends with. How many embryos did Nedry steal? The answer is 2 of each, 15 types, or 30 embryos. If you put money on it, you could make a quick buck, stumping Dr. Wu, Robert Muldoon, and probably Gennaro too. Next, there's a problem with Crichton's writing in here. On page 274, quote, they drifted along peacefully among dappled patches of light. If anything, they seemed to be moving faster than before. Awake now, Grant lay on his back and stared up at the branches overhead. No problem yet. In the bow, he saw her reaching up. Hey, what are you doing? He said. You think we can eat these berries? She pointed to the trees. Cut. Okay, the problem here is Tim and Grant have been mentioned, but not Lex yet. So to use an indeterminate pronoun, like she or her, isn't yet appropriate. Crichton must reference Lex before turning to the indeterminate pronoun. And hey, we're not fighting over Lex's preferred pronouns or Grant's preferred pronouns. We're literally saying Lex must be literarily referenced before the indeterminate pronoun comes up. It's like earlier when Crichton has Muldoon reference to this, but didn't say what on earth it was on page 193. John Arnold, in the page 193 instance, is using an alternative to the radio because the quote, main board is down. Quote, I have to use this, he says. It's weak, but it ought to work. I've tried on all 6 channels. I know they have radios in the cars, but they're not answering on 193. It's probably a walkie-talkie or a short band radio, but Crichton has used an indeterminate pronoun, this, without saying what the pronoun is referring to. Yeah, this happens in editing, and it's not unconscionable or anything, but it is wrong. And it was wrong on page 193, and it's wrong here on 274, as she starts asking about eating berries. You must refer to who the indeterminate pronoun refers to before you can rely on being indeterminate. It's just backwards. Park management. The tattoo on the hadrosaur's right foot indicates that each of the animals are tattooed for identification and potentially health records and stuff like that. It's labeled HD09, and we know that there are 11 hadrosaurs on the island, suggesting that this is the 9th hadrosaur introduced into the park, but now it is dead. It would also suggest that there are at least 2 other hadrosaurs which are of equal or younger age than this one, if number 10 and 11 are reasonably the next 2 of the 11 animals in the park. But whatever. In terms of motion sensors, we'll be reminded on page 277 by Malcolm that the motion sensors only cover 92% of the park, which is inadequate, he says, especially when you find that the remaining 8% are topologically unified. But we'll get to that in the next chapter. This 92% is consistent with what we learned in episode 26, Control, on page 129. And we were told at that time that there are places, like in the Jungle River, that the animals cannot be tracked. At the same time, we're told, though, that the motion sensors remember where and when an animal goes missing and waits for it to return or reappear. In this case, they should be able to locate where and when the Tyrannosaur was last detected by the motion sensor. But they don't. Instead, they are waiting, whatever that means. Finally, in terms of park management, I get that Muldoon is taking life into his own hands by hunting the Tyrannosaur out of containment with unproven tranquilizers and non-lethals, but drinking whiskey while also doing it has to be a breach of protocol, right? Like, he is really dodging back to the wild African parks and leaving his cushy InGen position behind once he brings out his flask at 7 in the morning. Island layout. To reacquire the Jeep Nedry stole, Muldoon and Gennaro drive on the east road to come to a narrower service road leading toward the Jungle River on 272, apparently in sector 1104, which is based on the overlaid grid lines on a map of the resort, we're told on 273. Just so you want to know. Poetic justice. The concept of poetic justice comes out of Muldoon's mouth while reviewing Nedry's demise on 273. Poetic justice is kind of self-explanatory, but let's get technical with it for the sake of being thorough. Poetic justice signifies the distribution at the end of a literary work of earthly rewards and punishments in proportion to the virtue or vice of the various characters. So it's said on page 230 of my 7th edition of A Glossary of Literary Terms by M.H. Abrams. It's nice to take some of these old books and use them. This isn't at the end of a literary piece of work, but it does come up at the end of Nedry's story arc. Upon reclaiming this Jeep, this puts an end to the chaos that he unleashed on the island. Going forward, the problems in the park will be oversights on John Arnold's end, mostly dealing with running on auxiliary power since the shutdown to get the phones back up and running, which they never did wind up using to call for a doctor to help Malcolm. Recall a helicopter can be there within 50 minutes. Hammond says it's about 40-minute trip. Back on page 76, and the doctor should have arrived and taken Malcolm back by like 9 a.m. But they don't call a doctor when they get the phones up. They just don't. But all that aside, Nedry has poetic justice doled upon him. Is his punishment proportional to his vice? The horror, terror, death, and costly damages, the trauma and loss caused by Nedry, do they balance out and equate to not a nice way to go? Is this poetic justice? I'd say likely. And it should make for an interesting idea to evaluate or rank all the deaths and measure whose actions are most punished or most rewarded by their virtues and vices. Nedry ranks as fairly balanced, I'd say. All right, leaving on that note, I want to say one last time, thank you to my special guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Jones. And I want to sign off today thanking you for joining me. If you want to read along in the book, add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, be a guest on the show and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me by ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, drop me a line and we can try and set something up. We can rehash and tear down and gush over and chit-chat about any part of the book, or also not the book, all you'd like. Well, for mostly 1 hour anyhow. Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chickens banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chickens Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, The Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. And you can find links to all of that baggage in the show notes by visiting the schickens.blogspot.com. We can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers. Or me, I'm on Twitter at RogersRyan22. Thank you dearly for tuning in to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too.